The question of whether to provide children artificial sweeteners as alternatives to sugar generates substantial debate among pediatricians, nutritionists, and parents seeking to navigate conflicting priorities around health, taste preferences, and family dynamics. The evidence base remains incomplete but suggests caution regarding routine use in young populations. Regulatory agencies, including the FDA and EFSA, maintain that approved artificial sweeteners are safe for children at typical consumption levels based on extensive toxicology testing. These determinations rest primarily on acute and subacute toxicity studies, demonstrating no adverse effects at exposures orders of magnitude above expected consumption. However, these safety assessments focus predominantly on cancer risk and overt toxicity rather than subtle metabolic or cognitive effects that might manifest only through long-term exposure during development. The emerging cohort evidence tracking children consuming artificial sweeteners longitudinally reveals some concerning signals. Studies from multiple countries document associations between regular diet beverage consumption in childhood and various outcomes, including paradoxically increased BMI gain compared to children consuming water, though not compared to children consuming sugary beverages. Proposed mechanisms include disrupted appetite regulation, altered glucose metabolism, or behavioral compensation where perceived calorie savings lead to increased calorie consumption from other sources. The cognitive effects remain particularly understudied in pediatric populations. While adult cohort studies suggest potential associations between artificial sweetener consumption and cognitive decline, parallel studies in children are largely absent. The developing brain potentially shows greater vulnerability to metabolic or neurochemical perturbations than the adult brain, but direct evidence is limited. This knowledge gap creates uncertainty. Absence of evidence of harm does not constitute evidence of absence of harm, particularly for long-term developmental outcomes requiring decades of exposure and follow-up to manifest. The appetite and taste preference implications warrant consideration. Exposure to intensely sweet tastes, whether from sugar or sweeteners, may maintain or even enhance preferences for sweetness, making it harder to eventually transition to unsweetened beverages and foods. Some researchers argue that the goal should be retraining taste preferences toward less sweet palates rather than perpetually satisfying sweet preferences through non-caloric means. From this perspective, artificial sweeteners delay rather than facilitate the ultimate goal of accepting naturally less sweet foods and beverages. The microbiome research adds another dimension. Animal studies and preliminary human research suggest that some artificial sweeteners alter gut bacterial composition in ways that may affect metabolism and potentially influence brain function through the gut-brain axis. The long-term implications remain unclear, but this represents another reason for caution, particularly in children whose microbiomes are still developing and potentially more plastic than adult microbiomes. Practical pediatric guidance from professional organizations typically emphasizes that water should be the primary beverage for children after infancy, with milk providing important nutrition during growth periods. Artificial sweeteners are not prohibited, but are not actively recommended either. The implied message suggests that occasional use in children already consuming diet beverages might be preferable to sugary beverage consumption, but routine use in young children previously unaccustomed to sweet beverages is discouraged. The family context influences decision-making. Parents who themselves consume artificially sweetened beverages frequently face difficulty restricting children's access without creating perceptions of unfairness or forbidden fruit effects that amplify desire. In these situations, some families find that transitioning together as a family toward unsweetened beverages works better than maintaining different rules for different family members. The age-specific recommendations vary. Artificial sweeteners appear least justified in infants and toddlers who have not yet developed strong sweet preferences and for whom water and milk provide adequate hydration and nutrition. School-age children who have already developed regular sugary beverage habits present more complex decisions, where artificial sweeteners might serve as transitional tools while working toward ultimate preferences for unsweetened options. Adolescents, particularly those consuming large volumes of sugary beverages and at risk for obesity or dental problems, might receive the clearest relative benefits from switching to artificially sweetened alternatives, though even in this population, water remains the optimal choice. Warning: the decision whether to provide artificial sweeteners to children involves weighing uncertain long-term risks against more certain benefits of avoiding sugar's well-documented harms. Given this uncertainty, the precautionary principle favoring avoiding unnecessary exposures during development appears prudent. The safest approach involves minimizing both sugar and artificial sweeteners, recognizing that this requires more effort and produces more initial resistance than simply substituting one sweet beverage for another, but likely produces superior long-term outcomes for health and taste preference development.